Howdy hey, I am Randall K. coming at you from magnificent Middle Tennessee with the Sunday edition of Weekends in the Word. Glad to have you here with me, and who is here with me? Tells me that quite a few of you are with me. We've got Stephen Black, and Mia is here, and Melanie is here, and Sean is here, and Lizzie is here, and Denzel is here. Well, thank you so much for joining me here. And there's a super heart from Melanie. All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Well, we are continuing to move through as an outline. I am using this book, Yeshua, The Life of Messiah, from a Messianic Jewish perspective. This is the abridged edition, and you will find the abridged version, I guess it says on the cover. Get that right. The abridged version compared to the 4 non-abridged versions. And you can find that book from Ariel Ministries, but if you want to head over, make it an easier location, if you head on over to BibleNewsRadio.com, check out the recommended resources page. Looking for my pointer here. You can scroll that down. These tiles are in alphabetical order. Click on that familiar black cover there of Messiah, Life of Messiah. Read a little bit about there. Still interested? Click the details button. That will take you over to the online store of Ariel Ministries. Great friends of ours and publish some great solid biblical stuff. Invite you to check it out. And before you check out, there with your shopping cart, be sure to put in the coupon code Bible News. That will save you 20% on anything you purchase in the store anytime, not just this book, but anything offer from a $3 PDF to, more expensive books and paperback, hardcover, all sorts of wonderful things there. MP3s, really good stuff. Invite you to check it out and see all that they have over there. All right, I want to do a little sort of housekeeping from yesterday. It's talking about, because we looked at the end of John chapter 11 after the resurrection of Lazarus, and how it's mentioned in John's gospel that Caiaphas, the high priest, was the one who said, that it's expedient for one man to die for the people, because the Sanhedrin, the ruling religious leaders, were concerned about if Yeshua became more popular, people were going after him, the Romans would take away their place and their nation, that they would lose their power, they would lose the limited autonomy that the Jewish people had under Roman rule, that would all go away. That eventually did go away, not too long afterward, not because they were thinking if they got rid of Yeshua that they would keep their place in the nation, but it's because of the very rejection of him that judgment came upon them, and Jerusalem was leveled by Roman forces in AD 70, and the name of the province changed from Judea to Palestine to erase any remembrance or acknowledgement of the Jews. Anyway, so it came about the two high priests, and I mentioned correctly, though not totally correctly, that one was appointed by the Roman government. And Caiaphas was indeed appointed by the Roman government, but also his predecessor, Ananias, or just in Hebrew it's Anan, but depending on, you put a Latin or a Greek suffix on there, it comes out to Anas or Ananias, but Anan is simply the Hebrew name. He was also appointed by the Roman government, but for whatever reason, was deposed and Caiaphas installed. Ever since the Roman government took over with the deposing of the monarch who was reigning at the time, Archelaus, I believe his name was. The Roman government came in, took over. They started appointing the high priests. So rather than just strictly by lineage, descended from Aharon or Aaron, where it was this one of lineage. The Romans decided they they put up and took down the high priest, as was expedient to them, and often choosing from the sect of the Sadducees rather than the Pharisees. The Sadducees being that sect of Jews who did not believe in a resurrection, which I don't understand, because resurrection is clearly found, well, in Jonah. We talked about the sign of Jonah, not the sign of survival or resuscitation. It's a sign of resurrection. Jonah died when he was inside the big fish, and it's clear from Jonah chapter 2 that he had died anyway. But then Daniel, talking about the end of the age, the resurrection of the good and the evil, the righteous and the evil, and we find resurrection in the Psalms and Ezekiel and other places. Anyway, so how the Sadducees? It's sad, you see, that why they didn't believe in resurrection. I don't get it. So, for what it's worth, going to cover a little stuff here regarding why, and we'll see later at the trial of Yeshua that it talks about two high priests, Annas or Anan, and Caiaphas, who were both high priests that year, because according to rabbinic tradition, really, which is sacrosanct, with Torah at this point. By the time the Pharisees had come along, again, which was a frustration for Yeshua, that they were teaching as the commandments of God the traditions of men, that that if you speak against the law of God, you'll be forgiven, but if you speak against the teaching of the rabbis, then you're damned. So the teaching of the rabbis, rabbinic Judaism, had supplanted biblical Judaism. Anyway, in the Talmud, in Yoma 72b, basically you'll find that although in Exodus it simply says that Aaron will be appointed the priest and his sons, there's not a clear succession. By the time this time in history, by the time of the first century, that it was just expected. It was an ongoing lineage. The natural sons of the high priest, whenever he died or retired, could no longer prevent him from performing the duties of the office, either his death or he retired because he's physically no longer able to do it. Then a natural born son would take over the office of high priest. Not the case under Roman rule. They just appointed folks. And in fact, that began in what we would now call AD 6. I was going to say 6 years after the birth of Christ, but it's really more like 10 years after. Because when the birth of Christ was set way back in, figured out, what was it? I don't remember what year, sometime in the 4th or 5th century, I don't remember, but there are several adjustments made to what we now use pretty much around the world. The standard is the we would call it the Gregorian calendar, named after Pope Gregory, but it's a mismatch of different calendars. In fact, um, they still bear the Latin, earlier times Latin names. I mean, we have September, the seventh month, October, Octo, the eighth month, November, December, 9 and 10. But those aren't the months anymore because we've got Julius and Augustus, July and August, that were stuck in there to even get the calendar back in sync with the solar cycle, the orbit of the Earth. And as recently as the 18th century, there were days taken out to get things back in sync. Anyway, with all these adjustments, looking back, the time of when Rome took over the province of Judea, they became the rulers of that area, would be what we would now call today AD 6, Anno Domini, in the year of our Lord. Hey, Sandy. 6, so approximately 10 years after the birth of Yeshua, which really speaks to the timing of the coming of Messiah. That the Roman Empire had rule over the area. They had the jurisdiction of capital punishment. They installed their own high priest, that kind of thing. So because the Jews recognized that the high priest was in that office until retired or died, even though Anan was replaced by Caiaphas, that as we read in Josephus, his name was really Joseph, son of Caiaphas, but he's really just known as Caiaphas. Anyway. One was set aside and then the other put in place. So the Jews said, well, the last one, Anan, he didn't retire or die, so they considered him still high priest. But legally speaking, from the Roman point of view, it was Caiaphas who was the appointed high priest by the Roman government at that time. And we'll get into those details when we get into the trial of Yeshua, because it becomes a little more important. And we'll see then that Caiaphas is actually the son-in-law of Annas. He had married one of Annas' or Anan's daughters, and not fitting with Jewish tradition at all, but just how Romans appointed high priests. All right, with all that said, I wanted to bring that up, kind of revisit the high priest, because of, in the harmony of the Gospels, what we see next. And that is in Luke chapter 17. We're going to pick up in verse 11. And let's do that prayerfully, shall we? God, you are the awesome God, King of the universe, worthy of all glory, honor, power, blessing, praise. Yours is the kingdom, the power, the glory. Everything belongs to you for your purposes, for your goodwill and pleasure. They were created and continue to exist. And acknowledging that, God, we look at this, thy word, which you have preserved throughout the ages for our instruction, for our equipping in righteousness. We humbly come to you and ask that you would give us eyes to see and ears to hear, spirits that are receptive to your spirit, that we might receive all that you have for us. We offer ourselves in this time to you, to use as you will, in the name of Yeshua, our Messiah. All right, pop with me over to Luke chapter 17. Picking at verse 11, and it came to pass, one of my favorite expressions in Scripture, that nothing is permanent, but that's not what it means here. It's just, it so happened, you might say, as they were on their way to Jerusalem. Okay, so they'd been up there in Bethany, right, where Miriam and Martha and Lazar lived, and Lazarus had just been resurrected. They were there for a while. Okay, now they're on their way to Jerusalem, coming a little bit further south. That he was passing along the borders of Samaria and Galilee. And as he entered into a certain village, there met him 10 men that were lepers, who stood afar off. Now, I'm going to stop there for a moment and talk about lepers. Now, well, maybe best to just go ahead and jump into some scripture. Leviticus 14. And I'm going to use the English Standard Version for this, ESV, just because it's easier reading. Luke 17, verse 11. But I'm going to jump back into Leviticus chapter 14 right now. And just going to read it. This is the law for cleansing lepers. It's going to tell us a lot about the New Testament passage in Luke. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, This shall be the law of the leprous person for the day of his cleansing. He shall be brought to the priest, and the priest shall go out of the camp, and the priest shall look. Then, if the case of leprous disease is healed in the leprous person, the priest shall command them to take for him who is to be cleansed 2 live clean birds and cedar wood and scarlet yarn and hyssop. And the priest shall command them to kill one of the birds in an earthenware vessel over fresh water. He shall take the live bird with the cedar wood and the scarlet yarn and the hyssop, and dip them and the live bird in the blood of the bird that was killed over the fresh water. And he shall sprinkle it 7 times on him who is to be cleansed of the leprous disease. Then he shall pronounce him clean, and shall let the living bird go into the open field. And he who is to be cleansed shall wash his clothes, and shave off all his hair, and bathe himself in water, and he shall be clean. And after that he may come into the camp, but live outside his tent 7 days. And on the 7th day he shall shave off all his hair from his head, his beard, and his eyebrows. He shall shave off all his hair, and then he shall wash his clothes, and bathe his body in water, and he shall be clean. And on the 8th day he shall take 2 male lambs without blemish, and one ewe lamb, a year old without blemish, and a grain offering, and 3/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, and 1 log of oil. And the priest who cleanses him shall set the man who is to be cleansed and these things before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And the priest shall take one of the male lambs and offer it for a guilt offering, along with a log of oil, and wave them for a wave offering before the Lord. And he shall kill the lamb in the place where they kill the sin offering and the burnt offering in the place of the sanctuary. For the guilt offering, like the sin offering, belongs to the Lord. It is most holy. Then the priest shall take some of the blood of the guilt offering, and the priest shall put it on the lobe of the right ear of him who is to be cleansed, and on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. The priest shall take some of the log of oil and pour it in the palm of his own left hand, and dip his right finger in the oil that is in the left hand, and sprinkle some oil with his fingers 7 times before the Lord. And some of the oil that remains in his hand the priest shall put on the lobe of the right ear of whom is to be cleansed, and on the thumb of his right hand, on the big toe of his right foot, on top of the blood of the guilt offering. And the rest of the oil that is in the priest's hands he shall put on the head of him who is to be cleansed, and the priest shall make atonement for him before the Lord. The priest shall offer the sin offering to make atonement for him who is to be cleansed from his uncleanness, and afterward he shall kill the burnt offering, and the priest shall offer the burnt offering and the grain offering on the altar. Thus the priest shall make atonement for him, and he shall be clean. But if the poor cannot afford so much, that he shall take 1 male lamb for a guilt offering to be waved to make atonement for him, and a tenth even of fine flour with oil for a grain offering, a log of oil, also 2 turtle doves, 2 pigeons, whichever he can afford. The one shall be a sin offering, the other a burnt offering. And on the 8th day he shall bring for cleansing, and so on. I'm not gonna. It's basically instead of the from the sheep, it's going to be the blood from the birds and the right hand and the right toe and the right ear and all that stuff. And that's for the one who cannot afford the offerings for his cleansing. So how often do you guys do this? Like once, twice a year? I'm not sure what you're talking like like the like the cleansing of a leper was supposed to be done once. But a little quiz here. How many instances of a Jew being cleansed of leprosy are recorded in the Old Testament? Little quiz. See if any one of you know. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. Hold on. Why is it doing that? Pay no attention to the man behind the counter. 1. Yeah, Sean says 1. All right. Well, here it is. Yes, there is one. There is a record of one Jew being healed of leprosy, and that's well, I guess 2 really. There's Moses and his sister Miriam, who were cured leprosy. For Moses, it was one of the signs he was to bring. He put his hand when he encountered the Lord via spoken through the burning bush. The Lord said, "Put your hand in your bosom, take it out." It was leprous, white as snow, and put it back, and was healed. And then when there's a little contention between Moses and Miriam, his sister, about her wanting to take some of the limelight, she was temporarily given leprosy. But that was all before this law was given for the cleansing the lepers of the leper. And so, as far as the priest having to do this, to go through this long ritual to verify and ceremonially cleanse a leper, had never been done. Yeshua makes that point in a couple of Gospels. I can't point to the chapter verse right now, but he said there were many lepers in the days of Elisha, yet in Israel in the days of Elisha, yet none of them were healed except Naaman the Syrian. So that was at the time when he's saying prophet is not without honor except his own hometown. But pointing out that even at the time of 2 Kings, there were plenty of lepers in the land of Israel, but none of them were healed. Only a foreigner, Syrian, was healed when he came. So because there was no record of a Jew being healed of leprosy and this long procedure being followed, the rabbis reckoned that this was a messianic miracle. That why would God go to all this length? And we're not going to get into the meaning of 7 in the right hand and the right foot and the ears and releasing the bird. There's a lot to this. I'm going to set that aside for now, but just it is this lengthy ceremony that's to be done in the case of someone who's cleansed of leprosy, and to verify and pronounce him ceremonial clean, ceremonially clean, and there was no record of it in Jewish history. So, so the rabbis reckon, well, this must be something that Messiah is going to do when he comes. He will clean, he will heal a Jew of leprosy. We know of Naaman the Syrian, but we never had a chance to practice this. So maybe since God went to the trouble of giving us this long list of stuff to do, perhaps that when Messiah comes, he will be the first to heal one of our own of leprosy. Now, notice that um, yeah, uh, well, okay, that's the eighth day. Okay, I want to go back up before the eighth day. Um, okay, and after that, he may come into the camp. Well, someone with leprosy was to live outside the camp in those days. This is the time of the Exodus when the instead of the temple there was the tabernacle. It was a tent of meeting. It was portable, and the Hebrews, the Jews, would move from place to place as the pillar of fire, pillar of cloud, and God would lead them. And so, among from but those with leprosy had to live outside the rest of the population. They could tag around on the outskirts, but they couldn't come into the camp. And in modern days, modern first century, long after Jerusalem had been reconstructed, though not quite as it was before the Babylonian destruction, uh, lepers were sent outside the camp, outside the city, had to live out there, and they often lived together in community. Even like 20th century here around the world, we have leper colonies, and I think there still might be in some places, even though leprosy is a treatable disease. Um, the lepers would live together outside the city, and weren't allowed to come into the city. Um, and when approaching anyone from outside their leprous community, and I didn't bring that Old Testament passage up, but they're to shout unclean, warn people that they have leprosy, saying unclean, unclean. And it was seen as more than just a physical disease, but a judgment upon them for sin. Anyway, so all that bringing us back, did the government give people leprosy on purpose? Like I don't know. I don't know if that knowledge was there to pass it along. I know if you look at the, you know what, that Dr. Stan Monteith wrote and researched. He made a convincing case that AIDS, or GRIDS as it was at that time, the gay-related immune deficiency syndrome, was intentionally passed on to the population, and intentionally to homosexuals, as to test the contagion. Anyway, it takes us kind of back to, there was that movie with Dustin Hoffman, Outbreak, and that kind of, yeah, I wouldn't put it past modern governments to, well, to develop contagions. I give people, let's see, because anyway, I don't know back then in the first century with with the Roman government and all that. All right, but Luke chapter 17. Okay, so and they entered to a certain village, and they're on their way to on their way to Jerusalem. They're outside of the city. And he entered a certain village outside the city, and there met him 10 men that were lepers. So they hung out together because they're leprous. And then, it's good to live in sort of some community, because it's just better, for your welfare, physical, emotional, mental welfare. Who stood afar off? They had to stand afar off because they were leprous. Now, normally what they would say when they saw non-lepers approaching is they would cry out, "Unclean, unclean." But here they lifted up their voices saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." Because rather than fearing that they would pass on the leprosy to someone who didn't have it, that they would infect someone else, they saw someone who, rumor had it, was the Messiah, the son of David, who could actually do something for them. And so they cried out, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." And when he saw them, he said unto them, "Go and show yourselves unto the priests." Now this is cool. Go show yourself to the priests, because it was the priests, as we just read in Leviticus chapter 14, that had to confirm that a leper had been cleansed and had to pronounce him clean with this long list of stuff. Now, in Jewish tradition, this was passed on to it's priests, plural, but the high priests ruled over the priests, just like Aaron was the priest above his sons, even though we don't see the actual term high priest appearing in the Old Testament. The hierarchy is there is clear with Aaron and his sons. And later on with other priests, pre and post Babylonian exile, we see that there's the chief priest, the high priest, and anyway, that one basically overseeing all the duties of the priests, and that specific, the high priest going into the Holy of Holies once a year, Yom Kippur, etc. Not going to get into all the duties of the priests, but the appointed high priest at this time, Caiaphas, he would have had to oversee this process, this verification that the lepers were cleansed, and going through this process. Now, this is the guy that just said, it's expedient that one man die for the people. Know nothing. They're concerned that Yeshua is going to cause an upset in the Roman government. They're going to come away and take our place in our nation. We're going to lose our, rulership, and we're going to even lose our nation to rule over. We're going to lose it all if this guy gets out of hand. And Caiaphas, though, we just read in John chapter 11 yesterday that he was prophesying, not really knowing that he was prophesying. It's expedient that one man die for the people. He's looking to get rid of him. They're plotting to kill him. The chief priests are plotting to kill Yeshua, having totally rejected him as Messiah. And now what? Go and show yourselves unto the priests. This thing they considered a messianic miracle. When Messiah comes, no Jew had been healed. And guess what? He's sending to him someone who has been cleansed of leprosy? No. 10 men that were lepers. Go show yourselves unto the priests. So it's just like talk about a dig of sorts. Well, but I doubt Yeshua was malicious in it. I don't doubt. I know he wasn't malicious, but it was just kind of, hey, you may want to reconsider this whole thing and reject me as Messiah. I've not only healed a Jew, but here's 9 of them, because we're seeing that one was a Samaritan. But still, the the high priest is gonna have to oversee this, with the 3 sheep and the log of oil and the half an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, all these, the guilt offering, the sin offering, the wave offering, or whether it's 2 birds. He's going to have to see this thing done 10 times. 10 times for each one of these guys over a period of 8 days, right? And so, yeah, quite, you might want to reconsider this Messiah thing, that here's someone cleansed leprosy. You're having to go through this, this lengthy ceremony, and guess what? You're doing it 10 times. Just saying. Anyway, so go and show yourselves unto the priests. And it came to pass, as they went, they were cleansed. So like that, they were they had leprosy, visibly leprous, with the discoloration of the skin, and maybe they may have lost some fingers or something like that, which isn't a cause of the disease per se. It's the numbness that the disease creates, and folks often with leprosy, untreated leprosy, get themselves into situations where, because they're not feeling the pain in the extremities, get themselves into situations of something hot or whatever, and they don't know, and their fingers are burning off or whatever, and they don't feel it. And so that's the way people lose fingers and stuff like that have leprosy. They don't, especially in third world places where, bug bites or stuff like that get infected, and they don't know it, and then rodents chew off your fingers and toes, and they can't feel it happening. And anyway, I'm sorry to gross you out with all that, but anyway, so these guys are visibly leprous, and Yeshua says, go and show yourselves to the priests. And it doesn't say he cleansed them, and they looked. No. And it came to pass, as they went, they were cleansed. They had to obey. They had to obey the master when he said, go and show yourself to the priest. They asked, have mercy on us. He said, go show yourself to the priest. And they went obediently. Not after they're cleansed, just the faith that took. And there are several places in Scripture where we see that. And Yeshua said, your faith has made you well. And it's not like, it's just the power of faith. That if we believe something hard enough, that'll happen, that it's a, psychosomatic kind of thing. It's that taking him at his word, believing that he will do it. In all the cases, people asked him to do it. And he says, your faith has made you well. It wasn't just hoping or wishing. It was seeking him out and coming to him in faith, that he could do what wanted. And here they asked him for mercy. He says, hey, go show yourselves. And they do. When there was no physical change at that moment in who they were, they had to, in faith, take him at his word and just do what he was saying, because they're asking for mercy. As he said, if you ask your, which one of you, if your child asks for a fish, will give him a serpent, or if asked for bread, will you give him a stone, or those kind of things. If you, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more your Father in heaven? So they're asking him for mercy. They're in faith. They know he's not going to tell them to get lost or have more leprosy or whatever. They're asking for mercy. They believe they're going to get mercy from him. And so when he says, go and show yourself to the priests, that's what they do. And as they go, they're cleansed. As they went, they were cleansed. And one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back with a loud voice, glorifying God. And he fell upon his face at his feet, giving him thanks. And he was a Samaritan. Interesting point. Samaritans, weeks, months, year ago, I don't know, talked about the Samaritans, how they were the the half-breeds, that the Jews that had intermarried with those foreigners that the Assyrians had brought in, and that kind of thing, and had changed the scriptures to reference Samaria as the place of God's holy city instead of Jerusalem. And we saw it in John chapter 4 with the woman of the well. You Jews say Jerusalem is a place to worship, but we Samaritans, it's this mountain here, Mount Samaria. And anyway, so there was this animosity between Jews and Samaritans in a really big way. And so just another sort of twist of fate, I guess, that one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, and he was a Samaritan. And Jesus answering said, "Were not 10 cleansed? But where are the 9? Were there none found that returned to the glory of God, save this stranger?" It's not that he was more of a stranger to him than the other 9, except that he was a Samaritan, not a Jew, not a full-blooded Jew, and so not properly of the household of Israel. And yet he came back and praised the Jewish Messiah. And he said unto him, "Arise, go thy way. What? Thy faith hath made thee whole." Not because he believed it enough that he would be healed. Again, not a psychosomatic thing. Where was his faith exercised? His faith exercised up there. Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. When he said, "Go and show," they went. There's the faith demonstrated right there. Faith that Jesus could do something, and faith to take him at his word and go follow his command, even though visually, externally, circumstances indicated that nothing was different. They literally walked by faith and not by sight. Thy faith has made thee whole. So, all of this to show some cool things. One, demonstrating that he was the Messiah, especially to the priests. The priests who we looked at yesterday were making plans to kill him. We got no place for this guy here. He's going to take away our place in our nation if people start following after him. It's expedient to get him out of the way to save our nation, which didn't help because they lost it less than 40 years later. Within a generation, their place and their nation were both taken away, and the memory of Judea tried to take away by renaming the Roman province to Palestine. So what they were trying to avoid, they actually brought upon themselves by rejecting and killing Messiah, although it was all according to God's plan, because Messiah did have to die for the people, for everyone, as a matter of fact, to die for the sins of the world. But from their point of view, it was rebellious and lawless and selfish, even though they ended up accomplishing exactly what God wanted. Well, not exactly. Messiah had to be killed, but they still rejected him, which ended up in the loss of their place in their nation. So it's really cool. That is sort of a final, not the final, but a final appeal. Yeshua sends him these 10 lepers to go through the ceremony that they themselves considered to be a sign of Messiah, and then had to do it 10 times to go through that. And then, of course, just the faith of these lepers. their faith that made them whole, their faith in Yeshua to heal, and their faith to do what he commanded, even though visually, by sight, in their very own bodies, things didn't look any different. Go and show yourselves to the priests. And they went and were cleansed. So may we also have that kind of faith that when we come to ask our Lord for something, that we believe that he knows how to give good gifts to his children. And if there is an instruction that he gives us after that, to follow it. Even if it doesn't seem very reasonable. If we're convinced that it's his voice, and we must learn to discern his voice, then there's no reason to wait for, put out a fleece or look for any kind of additional evidences that's really what we're supposed to do, but just to do it and then to see him work. And that will increase our faith. All right. A few of you still hanging out, and appreciate you sticking around with me this far. I'm going to pop on over, just take a look, see if there's anybody I've missed. I see a viewer over there on Twitch. Hey, viewer on Twitch. Haven't said anything, but appreciate you watching. And 4 over there watching on YouTube. The chat room is quiet, but thank you for watching, and hope you've gotten something out of this. So, with that, and just I was going to say an avalanche of hearts coming from Melanie, but they're going upward, so it's not an avalanche. What is it? It's a, I don't know. What you'd call it? You're quite welcome, Sean. What do you call a big collection of balloons when they rise? I don't know. Have to find a term for that. Anyway, with that, I bid you good night. And I do pray the Lord bless you and keep you, make his face to shine upon you, be gracious unto you, lift up his countenance upon you, give you peace. And him willing, we'll see y'all tomorrow afternoon, 4 p.m. Central, for the regular Bible News Radio broadcast. So, good night, and God bless.